So welcome, what are we calling this, a workshop session, something like that, working session? I think there's some public advisory committee members here. Thank you for participating, and if you're not on the advisory committee, also welcome and thank you for being here. We have two components to the workshop today. The first one, I think we're targeting the first hour devoted to kind of neighborhood connections. That was a particular topic that was raised at our last public advisory committee meeting, that some folks are interested in the 2 mile corridor and the various sections of that corridor. How are we thinking about improving neighborhood connections over or through or next to the new lowered highway alternative? And then the second session that we'll hope to start in about an hour, maybe we'll get there a little bit sooner, will be devoted to the multimodal station planning. We had 2 open planning studios, public forums back in mid-April. I don't know how many of you happen to join us for that. In the April public sessions, we presented 4 station concepts. Now we're up to 7, so we've added some additional concepts of how that station could be laid out and sited. We're also going to talk a little bit about perhaps if the station could be located in a different area. We'll see how the conversation flows. Again, it's pretty informal. When we get into the Q&A, I think Mike Morehouse is going to manage and facilitate the workshop. I also want to point out before we get started is the DOT's project team is here in full force. It's a multidisciplinary team. And the city's consultant team is also here, HOK and WSP, and you'll hear from them mostly in the second session. And I just want to point out that the city has really stepped up and is now really at the table with us, participating thoroughly. We meet with them on a very regular basis. We're really pleased that they have some consultant expertise, and it's really a good partnership that they're collaborating with our project team, offering some new ideas. I think you're going to hear and see some new possibilities that we can explore collectively, and so this is really good because it's through an thorough exploration of alternatives that we feel will reach the best solution, especially with public input. And this is perfect timing. Hi, Congressman. Welcome. Congressman, would you like to speak? We're just getting started. Would you like to sit in and observe and participate?
Well, I have to leave at 2, so you tell me when you want me to, because I have to go to another meeting. I apologize, but...
Well, the floor is yours.
Well, then that's terrific.
Okay.
We have the brochures. Well, first of all, let me thank the Department of Transportation for their incredible work, and let me also thank everybody at this table who's been involved for some time now with the whole viaduct issue and the problems inherent to that we're presented with here in the city of Hartford. In fact, the whole region. And as someone who's long been a proponent of tunneling so that we could recapture our river front, especially with the knowing that from a federal perspective that we have a recently named and hopefully open this fall national park at Colesville, which took about 14 years to accomplish, but it's here. And that national park is separated by an 8-lane highway from what was initially a federally constructed levee system turned over to the states, which is separated by the only Blue Ways designated national highway in the country and a national historic river, national heritage river as well, and levees on the other side. And so again, I want to commend the Department of Transportation. Without their thoughtfulness and their participation as we look forward not only at dealing with the viaduct, but the true problem for the region, from my perspective, the I-84 and 91 interconnection. Now, we usually go through a slide film presentation where I show Beatrice Auerbach Fox at this point and talk about why, mythically or historically, and I think there's a lot of more history than myth to the fact as to why that interchange system lined up adjacent to G. Fox and Company. But having said that, and knowing that it goes across the, I think it's the largest stone arch bridge in the world, in the Buckley Bridge, but also knowing that that bridge and around it faces problems that we're not even addressing here with the viaduct. We have something that has been very alarming to us for more than 8 years now, and we've had the Army Corps involved. Both cities, Hartford and East Hartford, are aware of this, but the concern with regard to sandpiping. Sandpiping or seepage is what caused the collapse of the 9th Ward in New Orleans. Contrary to popular belief, the water didn't come over the top. It was toppled from this phenomena called sandpiping. That's happening on both sides of the river next to our levee system. That comes under a program at the federal level called WRDA, which, like the transportation systems, have been woefully underfunded. And so I think it'll become obvious to you why we include these as part of our concept. Obviously, that is not a function of the Department of Transportation. That is the Army Corps of Engineers. And the Army Corps of Engineers said that they would readily like to solve the problem, provided there was the money there to solve the problem, which, as I'll say again, the Congress has been woefully negligent in putting the money forward. So much so that you're all familiar with, otherwise you wouldn't be here at this table, with the D+ rating that engineers and everybody and those concerned with the construction and the crumbling nature of our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure in general. And clearly, our levee system is as much a part of that as the roads and bridges that the Department of Transportation is in the process of working on. So, again, let me applaud DOT because they were given a very specific assignment in a very specific region that needs specific attention because of the crumbling nature of the current viaduct system. But I think in as much as looking at this and going before the Committee of Transportation and just having spoken with the chairman this week, I'm proud to say that he's dedicated to the fact of opening up concepts and visions that will actually solve problems out into the future. This proposal that you're looking at solves a lot of problems in this region, and all of these ideas that are being developed. I love the concept of moving the railroad station. I love a lot of the decisions that are going on here, and are completely supportive of that. But as we project out 100 years, and as we deal with the issues of the city of Hartford specifically, that being that we cannot be in a position, I say we, I mean as government, where we have to shut down the city for 2 years. A city that's currently struggling, in spite of what will be the best efforts on the department's part and everyone's part to try to coordinate it, there's just no way in that small area of compression that if that's the vision that we have and go forward with, can be done, but at great expense to the city. So the concept then became, well, what can we do that will deal with the issue of the I-84 and 91 corridor that will provide a turnkey operation where we can continue to make sure that the viaduct is safe and sound, and continue with the planning, excellent planning I might add, for what this might look like, but then envision, as we do, tunnels from Flatbush Avenue to Robert Street, and from what is the landfill in Hartford down to the South Station down in the Meadows, approximately. And in doing so, allow the close to anywhere, depending upon the estimate, between 50 and 60% of the traffic that never stops in the city of Hartford, or East Hartford for that matter, and provide a direct shot and a realignment of the interchange, but knowing that we can no longer come up with horizontal solutions for obvious reasons. Those were proposed many years ago, and for environmental and economic justice reasons could not be attained, otherwise the DOT would be presenting them. But to go with a vertical solution that is gaining salience not only here in Hartford, but all around the country. The Department of Transportation, Federal Department of Transportation, has a new bureau. It'll be about 2 years old come this August. It's the Build America Division. They talk extensively about these opportunities and a lot of the tunneling opportunities that are going on currently. And not only the tunneling opportunities, but the way to finance these opportunities. Here's what we know. We do know that there's going to be an infrastructure program. What we don't know, which has been the department's concern ongoing, as has been the residents and businesses, and clearly the governor's concern as well, is how robust will that be? And what kind of funding will they put forward? The chairman of that committee will be up here again in September, and again will be announcing his support for visionary concepts that solves a problem. What we believe about the tunnel concept is that it will unite a divided city of Hartford that's been divided both north and south by the viaduct and by 91 along the river. It's been a goal of riverfront recapture for more than 50 years. And when we met with Mike and we were talking about it with his group, a large concern of so many residents. That is not the charge of the Department of Transportation, but it becomes so if you go under the Connecticut River with a tunnel system. And that's what the plan proposes to do. We're also heartened by the fact that we know that the MDC is currently in the process of drilling more than 4.5 miles from West Hartford to the South Meadows. And they're doing this quite economically, we might add. We're also encouraged by drilling techniques that are being proposed by Elon Musk and others, so that we think that this is more than doable, and the geological samples that we know to exist because of the MDC studies of what is called, and I love to say this, Jurassic basalt. Makes you sound like you know what you're talking about if you can say, well, yes, it's Jurassic basalt that we'll be drilling through. And so we think that this will provide us the opportunity to create those tunnels while we remain in repair of the viaduct and the congestion that we're dealing with, so that we can have a turnkey operation. Now here comes the sizzle. Imagine then the repurposing of our bridges into the city of Hartford. Imagine what the whole Asylum Hill area looks like with a boulevard coming through there instead of an 8-lane highway. Imagine the through traffic and what that does. We had a press conference on the east side of the river looking at Hartford the other day. Imagine what 91 looks like. And the DOT has already done renderings, and when people see how they could actually see Coltsville, and when they see how from the convention center they would actually have access to the river, it becomes a wow moment. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. In East Hartford, we've dealt with years with something called the Mixmaster. It's the equivalent of downtown Hartford. And it has sent traffic hither and yon and certainly served a purpose in its day. But how much land could be then used for economic development? In talking with Catherine Smith about doing a REMI project behind both sides of the river, not only in the viaduct area in the city of Hartford or in the Mixmaster in East Hartford, but also along the river, and the access that we will have in a vision that makes this region accessible, livable, and intermodal. All the work of the Department of Transportation on intermodal connections. Unleash, and you know, public servants today oftentimes take it in the teeth more often than not. If you saw just the tiny work that the Department of Transportation did in saying, well, this is what it could look like, we need to unleash that power and that ability and the institutional knowledge that exists here. They do what they're asked given the resources that they've been provided. Now, when you look at this project in total, and when I say in total, not just the viaduct, but then going up to the bridge, the enlargement of the bridge, and then what you're going to have to do in East Hartford to untangle that mess as well, you're probably talking about the same amount of money. And so it becomes, from my perspective as the elected representative from the district, vitally important that when we're making the ask, that we're not going to be making an ask for something that we're going to have to fix in 15 years. But we do what people envisioned 100 years ago when they built the largest stone arch bridge in the world. That we have a 100-year vision. And that we have a turnkey operation, so we're not shutting down the city. And so the city can remain, and then the prospects and the economic development and the vitality and the livable communities. There would actually be a Charter Oak Bridge that could swing into Hartford, as it used to when I was growing up. We already know that the bridge has, for obvious traffic reasons, has to be aligned, and the realignments and repurposing and the value-added work that you've done already can only grow and enhance. I wish, and I think there's going to have to be more work that's done as the tunnel concept moves forward. I believe that it's the most logical, it's the most cost-effective, and I think it carries the largest upside in terms of economic development and having communities that are livable, accessible. We've been around, and I can share, I think it's in our brochure, the list of companies that have that we've already presented to, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. We have to go before many more people and individuals, etc. I'm just anxious to make sure that we get started, and as what I anticipate will be a vote this fall in Congress, that we're prepared and ready to come with, and I say this with all due respect, not an incremental solution that we'll have to go back to by the time we get it completed, but a longer 100-year vision that will carry with it such an enormous economic upside. We're also looking at legislation, given both municipalities and states' concerns, of ways in which currently, as you're probably aware with federal funding, it's an 80-20 or 90-10 proposition. We'll be pushing for the 90-10, obviously, but even at 90-10, with states and municipalities that are struggling, that can be difficult. So why not look for ways to phase that in? Why not look at ways where we can meet that? Because we know from the studies that the benefits will far outweigh this. We know that we're able to toll this region already without getting any kind of federal exemption. We know that that can help continue maintain and pay for that well into the future. And from my perspective, I believe that that's something that's essential as well. So I believe that Congress is going to have that vote this fall. That's why we've been out and about and talking about this program. The press conference the other day, people often say, well, that's great, you have these great ideas, but how are you going to pay for it? Well, we have a very logical, common sense, straightforward way to pay for it too. But that will have to pass Congress as well. But as I said then, and I'll say it here tonight, whatever the means to pay for this infrastructure investment, it's long overdue, and we have to do it. And there maybe, I'm going to have to do a lot of convincing down in Congress on the other side of the aisle to embrace a carbon tax that brings in $1.8 trillion, precisely about the amount that we're going to need to do an infrastructure program across this country that's paid for that doesn't burden any future generations. And then helped by programs like tolling and other means of financing that we can bring to the region. But we believe that that makes sense as well, because what it will do for both taking care of impacted industries like coal mining and people that work at wellheads, but also produces the revenue over a sustained period of time. And anyone you talk to from an economic perspective or business perspective tells you the same thing. What we want is predictability. And what we want is to know what the bottom line is. What they've gotten is chaos, uncertainty, in 1 year to the next proposals that don't give anyone any of the certainty to do the kind of planning that they're doing. That's why I support this act. But listen, there are other proposals that are out there, from gasoline taxes to whatever else is going to be on the agenda of people down there to raise the revenue. And I believe we should raise the revenue to pay for this, not totally kick the can to the next generation. That we have this obligation. I'll leave you with this thought. China invests 8.5% of its GDP into infrastructure. We're less than 2.5. You know the rest of the story about how we're rated and the obvious crumbling issues that you're dealing with here, right, with the viaduct. So with that, thank you. I'll sit down. I probably talked a little bit too long, but I just wanted to make sure that we share that. And also, listen, this work, this is not to supplant, this is to augment what you're doing already in a manner in which I think can be simpatico and even create greater dynamic economic growth for the future. And I hope we all can get on the same page. I hope we can all push towards the same, collective goals that I know everyone in this room shares as well. But I wanted you to know where we're coming from. Again, I want to thank the Department of Transportation. If they didn't, and many of you have written to them, if they didn't include this as part of their study going forward, we would be out of luck. Obviously, I think the more aggressive we are and the more bullish about this, and that's why I'm going to bring the chairman up here to visit the site again in September and continue to push for, I think, a 100-year solution that I hope all of you can support as well. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, so folks who came in while Congressman was speaking, if you want to be at the table, feel free to step up or move up to the table. So as I was saying before, some folks came in, 2 sessions today, a workshop on the neighborhood connections, and then we'll break and move towards the multimodal station planning effort. So I'll kick it off and turn it over to Mike.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is an exciting project. I just wanted a quick show of hands. So we've got a lot of different people here. How many people in the room are part of our I-84 Public Advisory Committee? Okay, great. How many of you have had some sort of working knowledge of this project, have attended other meetings in the past? All right. And how many are here for like the first time, just getting familiar? Couple? All right. So the way we've been working on this project for several years now. The way I like to describe it, and you just heard from Congressman Larson that this is very complex, and the vision can keep on expanding and expanding. It's kind of like squeezing a balloon. We started the project to solve a crumbling infrastructure problem. We realized there's also a rail issue, there's a bus fast track issue, there's an urban design and development issue. Every time you try to address one thing, you squeeze the balloon and something pops out through your fingers somewhere else. That's the way this project has sort of evolved. It's very, very complex, and everything is interrelated. So now we're hearing about congestion across the bridges. We're hearing about a failing levee system. We're thinking about East Hartford issues. And it's expanding and getting infinitely more complicated. And it's good that we're taking a broad, comprehensive look at this project because that's what you uncover when you start going through the planning process. And many of you have been with us for the several years, helped us think through this process, and I think we've come a long way. Some of the graphics and some of the things you're going to see today are the result of hard work from many of you in this room, I think we've achieved a remarkable amount of progress, but we know we're not done yet, and that's the value of a strong public outreach process, is that it's iterative, and we want to, kind of advance the ball a little bit today. We know now we have, a rail station project that's going on. So you all should have a handout that we created, and thanks to Jamie at the city for recommending we do this. I think this puts a little bit of a framework to the variety of issues that we've uncovered. There's kind of three bins of issues, if you will, very simplified. There's the things that we're really comfortable with, the result of many years of planning, things like we know a lowered highway for this particular project is the solution that we feel performs the best. We know the western side of the project, the interchange, we're pretty good with how that's configured and how it works. Local road networks, we know the rail relocation is a part of the project that's absolutely needed and we're solid on. There's also a bunch of things that we're still working on, but we feel we're pretty close on. We know we have to reconfigure and bring fast track into downtown, and we have some working routes for that. The eastern interchange area, we have a number of different concepts, and Casey will share those with you in just a moment. We know a deck somewhere in the Asylum Broad area is strongly preferred. It allows for economic development opportunities. And we have some pretty good working knowledge of how the local street system should work and operate to enhance walking, bikeability, transit use. Then there's a whole bunch of things that we're really still stuck on. And these are things that, a really strong idea has not emerged yet. Things like how do we address the Trident area, or what are the impacts on Ashley Street, or where do the western ramps terminate? So these are things that are still very much in flux, and we still require the assistance of you all in this room to help us think through them. So again, we might not have touched on everything, but I think this is a kind of a simple way to illustrate where we are in the project. So the first half hour, 45 minutes of this, we want to talk a little bit about the street system before we get into a discussion on the rail station. And what we really want to know is, what are you all interested in hearing about? Because we probably can't approach all of these topics in one day. But there's been a lot of concerns, and I'm sure many of you have different ones, but we've planned a bunch of new connections, a bunch of reconfigured streets in downtown and throughout the Hartford area. Is that a primary concern? How those, did we cut something off that shouldn't have been? Should we add it? Did we add something that is in the wrong place? Did we move something? That's one of the themes that we might touch on today. Or are people interested in things like routing? When we take interchanges away, when we move ramps, obviously there's going to be different travel patterns that are going to have to establish. There's the concern over that? Is travel time, a big issue? What about traffic? We know Laurel and Ashley Street. We know, we've heard concerns about those. Do we want to spend time on that? How about the overpasses? Did we get them right? Most of them are in the same place they are today. They're just over the highway, not under. But in terms of how we're designing them with landscaping and bicycle and pedestrian amenities, you can speak to that. Other street features, or are there intersections of concern like the Trident? So I think what I want to do is get a show, raise some hands. I'd like to go around the room and get a sense from those of you who are willing to participate, what you came here today to talk about, and then we can figure out how do we go about this in kind of a facilitated manner so everybody gets a chance to speak. Does anybody want to start with a yes, Tony?
The things I'd probably be most interested in are the connections across the lowered 84 concept, specifically the site is the highway drop low enough that you can actually see across it like 676 in Philly, or is it something where you have these humped crossings that don't draw anyone across? And then the interfaces between the entrance and exit ramps and the community. That's like the second thing I'm most interested in, because that's probably one of the worst interactions that the highway has with the neighborhoods right now.
And so I'm clear, you're talking largely the sort of the visual implications of the lower highway and the cross streets and how it looks
like
from
lower, how lowered,
yep.
Is it trenched, and then secondarily, I think that just where the highway interacts as entrance and exit ramps, and how are those treatments being? Are the cars being considered guests in a neighborhood, or are the cars speed and flow priority?
Just a show of hands, how many in the room sort of, is that a topic that everybody wants to talk about? It looks like maybe a third of the room or so. Okay. Tony?
I'm most interested in the proper location for the new railroad station and the street configuration all around it, including the Trident area, and how that improves connections with the neighborhoods and restores some of the historical connections in Hartford.
Great. So I think what we'll do is, I don't want to avoid the rail station issue, but I think we want to talk about that in about a half an hour. But certainly the connectivity, maybe the urban grid, sort of the connectivity of downtown between Asylum Hill and downtown. Is it fair to say? How about a show of hands for that? Kind of the same. Saw another hand back there. Yes.
Yeah, my real concern is because I've seen all the investment the last few years and what's coming. $140 million for UConn, maybe 250, maybe 500 million for the XL Center, all the new apartments, Meadows Music Theater hopefully gets upgraded. Front Street now is active. When we do all this, all those investments are in danger. So I think before we get too deep into the weeds here, we should know from your operation, how are you going to be able to keep those people in business in the 2 to 5 years it takes to do this? I think that's awful important. People should know that before they invest more money.
So it's sort of maintenance of kind of current economic activity and just the ability for people to continue to get around while construction is underway. Right, okay. Yes.
I'd just also like to concur with what Mike just said. I represent one of the 3 hospitals that are here, and while certainly we look at it from employer standpoint, there's also a lot of people that come into Hartford for treatment purposes. And what kind of disruption is there going to be for that, and are people going to be seeking out other options?
Traffic impacts,
To avoid
delay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody along the wall have anything to add? I think what we'll do is we'll start with a very brief overview of the options that we currently have for connectivity, and then I think what we're going to want to do is, and it's a big group, so we're going to have to figure out how to manage this, but break off and try to understand, or go around the room at least and make notes on the maps. Feel free to grab a magic marker, draw things. Give us as much feedback as you want, but we're going to have to take this back for consideration. So. And we would like to hear everybody's thoughts. So it is a big group and hard to manage, but I guess we'll figure that out after Casey does his bit here. And Francisco's got some notes going. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. What I'm going to do is go through the options, the proposed highway layout that's on the maps in front of everyone there in the table. Just on some slides here. Starting in the western half of the corridor, and again, this is what's illustrated on the maps in the table. So that western part of the corridor is from about Park Street to about Citadel Street. So proposed I-84 would come over Park Street like it is today. From there, it would be lowered down to ground or below grade, whereas today it's elevated. Today it's elevated above Laurel Street and Citadel Street. So it would come over Park Street, below, at or below grade, kind of descending as we go north to a point where it'd be about 10 to 15 feet below grade approaching Citadel Street. In terms of off-ramps, we would essentially be replacing the existing Sisson Avenue interchange. Today, off-ramps and on-ramps from both directions come all the way over to Sisson Avenue here towards the west end. So we'd replace that. They take up a lot of space, as you can kind of see on the aerial here, all these on and off ramps. So we try and replace that with a more consolidated interchange, take up a lot less real estate. So we propose eastbound off-ramps and an off-ramp and on-ramp to Laurel Street. This is just a little bit south of the existing intersection with Capitol Avenue. The existing Capitol Avenue comes through here. So then Capitol Avenue is part of the lowered highway. Today Capitol descends beneath the railroad, you can see here, and beneath the highway. Capitol would be raised It would be over both the railroad and the highway. It would start to climb just before these two buildings. On this map, these blue shaded buildings represent potential property impacts. So Capitol Avenue would start to climb over the railroad and over the highway, and would provide a westbound off-ramp and on-ramp. One of the biggest benefits of being able to consolidate the interchange as we proposed would be kind of freeing up this large area of land that's currently occupied by the freeway ramps. As you can see in this proposal, we recommended a new local street connection that starts at West Boulevard at Sisson Avenue. That's where the current Sisson Avenue ramp is in. So the new local road would extend to the east and connect into Hawthorne Street. Now this area in here, we're at a very preliminary stage with our designs. This area is flexible. We've had some thoughts from folks about the potential desirability of this parcel, which is a city-owned parcel. There's definitely flexibility in how this road could come through here, in what manner land could be retained for potential future development. With that, if there's any questions, we can stop and pause on the western options here. I know a lot of you have stuff in front of you, some of you in the back don't have the maps directly in front of you.
We also have the 3D digital model up on the monitor here, if you want to visualize it a little differently. Nick can manipulate it and go to any location you'd like, or if you're ready to move on.
Just a quick question, just to clarify, the orange segments, is that where the interstate is going underneath the street?
Yeah, those are bridge structures. Sorry. Yeah, so the orange would represent bridge structures versus the yellow is like at-grade roadway pavement.
And in terms of Park Street, any reason why it's starting to submerge the interstate after that point, as opposed to before Park Street, to allow continuity along Park Street?
Yeah, we looked at that in pretty good amount of detail about a year and a half ago. And there were, in order to get the freeway underneath Park Street back here, there would be quite a few technical challenges associated with that. One of them comes from the fact that the south branch of the Park River is right next to the freeway in that location. And we're starting to bring the highway down below the water table, which really brought some engineering challenges to it. Not necessarily things we couldn't solve. It also brings us closer in proximity to kind of down off the page would be where we have the Flatbush Avenue ramps today, which wouldn't be impacted by this project at this point. So how that would all intertwine under a lower condition under Park Street. And the other thing we kind of thought about was the presence of the railroad and CT fast track bridges over Park Street, which are there today, which under this project there would be no necessarily change to. And so those would still present that type of barrier regardless if the freeway were to be lowered. Now we have looked at some potential ideas for how Park Street could be better connected underneath I-84, and that could include having a bridge that has the abutment set back, so there's a lot more space as you walk underneath. Some lighting that could be provided to just make it a more attractive place as you're moving between the two sides of the freeway.
I think this is a pretty good solution on the west side here. And the liberating of 15 acres around the Sisson Avenue ramps is spectacular, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think it makes a lot of sense to put a new through street between West Boulevard and Sigourney, extending Hawthorne and West Boulevard to connect.
What happens to the Hartford current, yes, the Hartford current building there? It looks like it's getting...
No, the Hartford current building would be kind of over here. So Broad Street would kind of be over here on this map. You're looking at these ones?
Yeah, what is that building?
That's the DAS office tower, or it used to be the DAS office tower. So that's been vacated.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No. Okay. Good. So I'm going to move on to talk about, right now we've got 3 potential interchange configurations on the eastern side of the project. Each of these maps has one of the ones we feel is better performing, but that's, still all 3 of them are potentially in play. And as noted on the handout that was provided, this is still an area where, we think we're moving towards the right solution, but we know we're not there yet, and this is where we really value input. And as Tony had brought up, this is where we start to look into the potential station. So the first thing I'm going to mention on these maps is the potential railroad relocation, the proposed railroad relocation. This is where that really comes into play, where this would start. So the existing rail corridor comes from off the page. It snakes underneath the highway, crosses at this kind of oblique angle, swings around to Union Station. Union Station's right here, comes underneath I-84 again, and continues off to the north. So again, that's the primary reason I-84 is elevated, these two crossings that exist today here and up here. So in order to lower the highway to or below grade, we need to move the railroad so that they don't have to cross twice. So these red lines, this red kind of corridor here represents that railroad relocation. So it would go off its existing alignment. Approximately, this is the large, recently constructed parking structure that Aetna has. So we would come offline from about here, parallel the highway, come into kind of a tunnel section beneath Broad Street, beneath Farmington, and beneath Asylum. You might be able to tell that it's kind of widened out. That's where we've kind of first envisioned the potential platforms to access the train. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then the railroad would kind of match in to the proposed alignment. Here's Walnut Street, and then kind of just before that Albany Main intersection. So once we're able to do that, the highway, which as I was talking about on the western option, was lowered to or below grade, was about 15 feet below ground, where this parking lot is west of Synergy Street. It would be able to remain at or below. It would rise to about ground level through this area. So today we have the Park River Conduit, which is a 40-foot by 20-foot concrete box culvert, basically where they buried the Park River as a flood control structure, which comes through this area and then curls around like that. And so we did speak with Army Corps of Engineers about the feasibility of potentially relocating that. It would be a significant challenge, and at this point our proposal would take the freeway and have that climb and sit above that conduit structure. And then, so sort of following this area, it would dive back down again to be kind of 10 to 15 feet below where natural ground level beneath Broad and Asylum, and kind of carry on to connect into that kind of canyon section that you have today that goes to about High Street. In terms of on and off ramps, we would essentially retain the Synergy Street on and off ramps that exist today. In terms of eastbound ramps, we have an off ramp and an on ramp from a new road we proposed, which starts where the Capitol Avenue ramps come today. It would start down there and connect to Asylum Street. This would be located off to the west side of Bushnell Park. So we'd have eastbound ramps would come to this new road, and under this proposal, we've got westbound ramps that would come to this sort of street extension from Myrtle Street into Edward Street. Now, this area of the project is where we're really still working with stakeholders to understand the right solution. So I'm going to page into the next concept, and you're really going to start to see the difference if you keep your eyes in this top right part of the page. So under this concept, which is the one that is on the maps in front of you, Cogswell Street would be realigned into Edward Street here, and on and off ramps in the westbound direction would come to that street. The third option on the table would bring the westbound and on and off ramps to the existing Myrtle Street, would require this potential street to be constructed near the Hartford campus. So, ultimately, we're still trying to weigh some of these different factors, and we don't think we necessarily hit a complete home run with everything yet, which is why we're here today, which is why we're talking to everyone, and want to understand some of the things you might like about some of these, some of the things you want us to keep working on. So, with that, I sort of open the floor. There are probably 15 things about this that I could have explained, but in the interest of time, I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Well, it seems that to me, I live in Asheville Street, that the third solution, this solution on the board seems the most viable, in that the on and off ramp is directed toward Collins Street.
Yeah. So I would want to say one thing about that, is that we are continuing to explore ways to kind of generate that type of movement with this concept. So I see what you're saying. The road is aligned right with Ashley Street, which would direct potentially traffic down there. So, we are continuing to investigate ways to almost create a S-type movement there, where the through would direct you to Collins, because we do understand that Collins Street is the primary vehicular way to St. Francis Hospital, and has been for decades.
Well, the way it is right now, you have in and out from Broad Street and Asylum Avenue and Capitol Avenue, which are major roads. So even though there's traffic, but they disperse and collect in a certain manner. There is a traffic problem at the triangle on Broad Street currently, but with the new highway, I think it is important to bring the traffic or draw the traffic from Major Street and not local street. So that's the concern. The other thing too is around the Sergeant Ashley Street, we have road closure a little bit further up.
Mm-hmm.
So that tends to create a more of a congestion or a dispersion problem.
Sure.
With traffic coming into the area. So the closer the exits and entrances are to Asylum Avenue, the better, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Can you explain why the Cogswell Street nubbin has been removed in all of these?
Sure. So, and I would just say on that we have highlighted on this handout, the Trident, the Farmington Asylum Cogswell Broad Trident, is very much an area that we're still working towards a solution. So what's illustrated in these concepts that Tony's referring to is the removal of this segment of street, which I think is technically Broad Street, between Asylum Avenue and Farmington Avenue. Now, as many of you probably know, the Trident gets very congested, particularly in the PM peak period. One of the primary reasons for that in the PM is you've got a kind of a conflicting set of traffic movements. You have a large percentage of traffic going east-west, either up Asylum or Farmington, and then you have a lot of people coming down from these employer parking lots to get on the freeway at Broad Street. So the conflict there, and then the very short nature of that little segment really affects the operations of those two traffic signals, and they kind of bleed into each other, which causes the negativity in operations you see today. We have tried many different scenarios, and I think we'd be happy at a future date potentially to really sit down and dedicate a whole presentation to that. But ultimately what we found with this solution, which we kind of developed in the spring of this year, was that traffic that today comes down through to get on the eastbound on-ramp, no matter what, whether this street was there or not, would likely come down to get on the off-ramp now that it's been relocated from Broad Street to this new road adjacent to Bushland Park. So that did eliminate a big kind of that crossing movement. And what we found was if we just took that segment of street out just for analysis purposes, that it enabled us, first of all, the traffic operations were significantly better. And I know the takeaway from that is we're only talking about traffic. It's the traffic operations will be better with much narrower streets. We'd really be able to reduce the cross sections of these roads, which would potentially make them significantly better both for bicyclists and pedestrians. Now we understand it's removing a connection, and we're here to talk about that and to understand exactly how that spins back on all the users of the facility.
Could you come up with a list of possible ways to prioritize this discussion?
Yeah, we have a whole set of slides. Tim, do you want to walk through some of the slides on the tray?
Just a quick comment while you're getting the slides up.
Yeah.
When we talk about losing a connection in a city where 21% of residents almost never have access to a car, you don't have to lose a lot of that connection. It still can be a pass-through for anybody on foot or on bike.
Or bicyclists, right?
And it's right next to what would be your multimodal transit hub. which is where that concentration of non-car-based users would already be.
Right, and so that's a very good point, that that connection would still be available for non-motorized modes of transportation. 230 ways.
So,
I don't know.
we're not settled on any particular option for the Trident yet. As Casey mentioned, we've looked at, I don't know, maybe close to a dozen different scenarios. And this one seemed to be, well, it's a compromise because it disconnects that thoroughfare in Broad. It's the smallest impact. All the other alternatives appear either they have a fatal flaw, they simply won't work, or the intersection gets really big. And what we'd like to do is talk to you, maybe here in a separate session. There's going to be some compromise to the solution. We're pretty convinced that there's going to be a compromise. So the question is, what is the community's priority or priorities? Is it the size of the footprint? Is it traffic flow? Is it safety? Is it the connection? How would you collectively rank these issues? Because I think that's the only way we collectively come to kind of a decision or consensus, because there's going to be compromise. And we're not sure what the right compromise is. Our hunch is you're very sensitive about size of the intersection and bicycle and pedestrian comfort. But it could be, if this were deemed as a great solution or a superior solution, there is that disconnect from the motor vehicle point of view. So right here, right? But this could be for pedestrians, bicyclists, open space. But it has a little bit of a circuitous route to get around. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I came in late.
No.
Tentatively for now, are you planning on maintaining the on-ramp at Broad Street for 84?
No.
That's going out. That would be, yeah, then what you're saying does make a lot more sense.
Change the dynamics of
Yeah.
the traffic flow in that area.
Yeah.
So I don't want to interrupt whoever wants to lead this conversation in terms of the options. We can flip through them very quickly and maybe move on to the next. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
As you know from the neighborhood, the connectivity is very important. And there, if you look at a big map, the way to get, the direct route to get north-south is way down like until Sigourney Street. And then it even, right now, doesn't go all the way across. But it's an important connection north-south as far as livability, especially since you've taken out Flower Street.
Understood. And maybe we can focus on what would be, if we were to recommend the next best solution, what would it look like? What is that? And maybe we can show that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we looked at is really during the peak traffic hours. And as Casey had said, there's some delay going through these intersections. There's too many in a short distance. So what we tried to do is eliminate some of the conflicts. And we've gotten, so we looked at traffic patterns, where is traffic coming from, where is it going to, and what we found is the majority of the traffic, if you can see on this, is really doing that split between Farmington and Asylum. It's not really taking a lot of the turns going down Broad and up to Cogswell, especially if the ramp isn't there. This is existing, and you can see here on this diagram where this is the on-ramp. So there's some traffic that does that, but if that on-ramp isn't there, you remove that north-south. This is existing traffic operations. You can see a lot of red here. Again, because of a lot of delay, and the delay backs up into an adjacent intersection, which causes even more delay. More of the traffic patterns, and the thickness of these lines represents the amount of volume going through the intersection. So the thicker the line means the more of the predominant movement.
What are the hours for this problem?
This is, again, during the peak hours.
What are the peak hours?
The peak hour in the morning from 8 to 9, 7 to 9, and then from 3 to 5, or 3 to 6, 4 to 6. So during the peak work hours. So it would be a totally different scenario if it was off of those times. But for what we've been looking at is during those peak times.
I don't think
Your comment was what?
No, I go through that intersection all the time, and the bigger delay is waiting for the pedestrians to cross at the Hartford on Cogswell Street. That's where the backup is. No offense, Hank, but where the guard stops traffic. I went through it last night at 4 4:30, not a problem.
Well,
Waited one light.
What's important is what will the traffic flow conditions be with our proposed
Yeah.
project, not so much what they're like today.
But, okay.
Wouldn't it be
But-
better with the
gonna be-
Broad Street ramp?
Yeah, should be better, should be better, yeah.
The crossing is not in that section, though. The crossing's all the way up near our visitors
Right.
entrance.
Right, but then then the next intersection is fine. I don't have any trouble getting through that intersection, but anyhow. Are we going to be, just a procedural thing, I know the city has consultants, are we going to be hearing what they're coming up with
Yeah,
today
I
too?
think in a couple minutes, we're
Okay,
gonna
I just
transition to
was-
the station
yeah.
design, so.
No, but I mean, what the consultants that the city has?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Are-
think they've got some ideas as
I'll
well.
be real quick on this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
No, I just was curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we know this is, the Trident is a very
Hot.
hot topic. Thank you.
Challenging.
Challenging topic. So this is the, one of the solutions. It's not necessarily our proposed. This is a solution, again, that worked well traffic-wise. Also it works great bike ped-wise. If we kept the same configuration that's out there today, with all of the same movements, it's a very, very big intersection, and there's no room for bikes. If we were to widen it, we'd be talking about property impacts north and south, and also east and west. So right now, it's maximized by vehicle lanes, and right now, those lanes are very small. They're 10 to 9 feet wide. We typically like to see 10 to 12 feet wide for lanes. So they've already been maximized as far as how much you can fit in there. So these are different, I'll try to get to some of the, people have looked at the Trident for years and years and years trying to find a solution. This was assuming that this is an existing solution that the DOT had looked at, assuming that the Broad Street on-ramp would still be in the same location. It's basically like a one-way couple where Asylum Street would be one-way westbound, and then Farmington would be one-way eastbound. This is from actually the Hartford's consultant when they had recommended a roundabout, and we did look at a roundabout here. And the issue is if there's just too much volume for a single-lane roundabout, and there's queues that would queue up on each approach to the roundabout. There's just not enough capacity. Roundabouts work very, very well, but they do have some of their challenges, especially with bikes and peds going through there as well.
How about a 2-lane roundabout?
We did look at that as well, and I don't know if Nick, you want to say something really
Sure, I
quick
can
on
talk about it, but Tony, actually, I was hoping to talk with you and Bill McCarskey afterward. I have some more detailed information that would help us kind of hash out ideas.
I have some for you too.
Roundabout subcommittee.
Some other ideas of splitting up the east-west movements. We're taking Farmington and coming down to this new road here, Bushnell Park West.
What do we think about that? Or do we not have a conclusion?
I think Nick, what we saw, there's no critical flaws traffic-wise. So it's still, something that can be considered.
Could you name the streets? That's a little confusing.
Yeah.
So this right here is Asylum. Here is the existing highway. Here is the train station, Spruce Street right here, Bob. And then this would be Asylum coming up right here and rerouted a little bit. Here is the Hartford's campus. Here's the YWCA. So this would come through, move these ramps instead of coming out Bushnell Park West. This new roadway would be coming here and then have ramps off of that.
That's a lot of hill there, is it not?
There is. This is a very steep road. This would be a very steep road.
Also, those little skinny ones are off-ramp, on and off-ramp?
On and off ramp, yes. So
I
the
see.
highway being here,
Yeah.
this would be the off ramp, and then this would be the on ramp. So the on ramp would have to go underneath Asylum Street right here. So it'd be accurate and going underneath.
Before you move to the next slide, can you talk about, yes, something like this suggestion has more intersections, which could be problematic for expeditious vehicular traffic flow, but in terms of visual sight lines, you're not dealing with a wide asphalt plaza that's splitting out. Can you talk a little bit about, crossing pedestrian-wise of something like this suggestion versus maintaining the Trident?
Yeah, so we want to be as
For
efficient as we
pedestrian
can with the traffic operations. I think what we showed before is a lot of the traffic is equally split between the two forks of the Trident. So by separating them, now you're creating a lot of lefts and then a lot of rights going through the intersection. So not as efficient, but something that can be overcome. The intersections are larger in this scenario because, again, you have to accommodate those movements. And even though these intersections are a little further apart, there's still not really a lot of room between the intersections.
You would make the left turns happening along the, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the street that's.
This Farmington right here?
No, further to the right.
This right here?
No, further right.
This one?
Running, yes, along the,
Yep.
I'm just thinking of, with knowledge, people would avoid Asylum and cut down to get to Farmington earlier.
Well, yeah, under this, if the ramp was here, today we have the on-ramp here, so people have to come down Asylum and take a right on this Bushnell Park West and take another right to get on. Now you'd be taking a left turn right here, so this would be an issue with this intersection, whereas taking the rights are much more efficient because you get cars out of there very, very quickly. The left turns you have to wait for your specific time, so that would take longer to get there. Just real quick, just other possibilities. Yes. Yes.
That if you blocked it out with no traffic, with no vehicular traffic, between Asylum and Farmington there, what would be the game plan? Is that like are you making like a Pratt Street Mall? Is it going to be a no man's land? Is it going to be can an emergency vehicle still use it? A fire truck, a police cruiser on a chase like that? Can they still traverse it, or is that just done and done from a traffic point of view?
From the original one that we had just shown, I think what that would be is more of a pedestrian plaza, so I don't think we would encourage having emergency vehicles going through it.
Everyone would know that, but it would be pretty much just.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you then make it like a Pratt Street kind of thing, kiosks, that kind of stuff, open up for commercial foot traffic like that?
Yep, possibly. Again, just more possibilities. This is a good one. This is one of my favorites. Nick loved this one too. So we looked at what if we could keep all the movements, and if anyone's familiar with single point interchanges, this is kind of a modification of a single point interchange where we're trying to accommodate every single move. We're still trying to make it as efficient as possible. And you can see really what that does. It just blows the whole thing up. It is really not what we're looking for. But this was a way of trying to accommodate everything in one intersection. Not recommended, but still something that we looked at. I think that's what, maybe that's it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think,
So this, to answer your question, this would be more of a pedestrian plaza type thing and not really for emergency vehicles.
I wanted to make a suggestion. I know Tom from WSP has a little, this from the city, wants to come up and talk a little bit about some of his network opportunities here. Go ahead. But I know there's a few people here today that really wanted this local road connectivity discussion to happen, and unfortunately, we maybe overestimated our ability to squeeze this all in. And I know a lot of you want to hear about the rail station, so we want to jump into that pretty quick. But having said that, if there's a few of you who are less concerned with the rail location and really want to talk a little bit more about these street connections, we can set up some tables outside of the room. We can bring some maps. We can have some facilitated conversation with Francisco and others from the project team, draw some things on maps. So I want to just offer that up to you all, since we didn't get a chance to break out like we had hoped we would. So I'll, with that, I think, Tom, you had a few slides you wanted to go through before we get to the actual rail station discussion.
yeah, and before Tom speaks, I think I'm maybe repeating what I said when we started, but it's worth repeating that, we've done a lot of work with regards to the multimodal station and the street arrangements, the possibilities, where the ramps could go. But the city is really collaborating now with us. They have WSP and HOK on their team. And so what you're going to see today are some new ideas, some fresh ideas. They haven't been fully vetted, but the good news is that the state and the city are really collaborating together, and that we think collectively, working together, we're going to come up with the best possible solution. So it may be confusing to people in terms of where these ideas are stemming from. Bob?
Just a personal observation, and that is, I agree with those who say the west part is okay. The eastern connectivity has always been hard for me to grasp the alternatives, because I can't keep in my mind what the last slide showed while I'm looking at this slide. And I know there's considerable concern about, Jennifer just expressed, about connectivity in the east side. Is it possible to have a section sometime where those of us who are on the, who've been on this for a long time can have a better discussion of the alternatives, the advantages, and what the compromises should be?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Sounds like you want to stay for the station.
Yeah.
And maybe we have a separate standalone session just for the east end design options. Yeah, we'll set that up. We'll use the 3D model and we'll go through very slowly so you can really grasp the nuances. Because a lot of it is nuance.
And I think the Triton conversation could take an hour
the
or two
Triton.
just on its own. I mean, to really get a full, appreciation of everything that's been done. So I think we ought to do that, Bob.
Yeah, it has an
Yeah.
impact on the whole
yes,
Eastern
absolutely.
connection and all that too. So-
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you for, and Tom, why don't you come up and kick it off?
Thank you, everybody. My name is Tom Jost, and myself and David Spillane and Bill Kenworthy are looking at this project in the context of how it shapes Hartford, the city, how it shapes the neighborhood around it, and how this major investment can really be the linchpin for how we perceive the city's growth, how we perceive the growth of the neighborhood over the next century. And that's an incredibly important context. There's a number of places around the country where highways are being reinvented, and they're being reinvented really for a much different way than just car movement. And they're thinking about how that highway creates gateways into the city, how that highway can be part of making the city a great attractor. And this project here has an incredible opportunity to reposition the city of Hartford. And part of our mission and mandate for this is to think in that context, how can we make that happen? And so to do that, we kind of stepped back a little bit and thought about, well, what was Hartford, how was Hartford originally founded and settled, and how did it originally grow? And this is a map from 1890, and it's interesting because there were a lot of components already established over 100 years ago that really kind of structured how Hartford has grown. You have the river, you have Bushnell Park, and you've got the rail station. And really the only road going through that area is that Asylum corridor. But even so, through that time, and this is a picture from the 30s, there was a dense city fabric centered around that Asylum Avenue corridor, that strength of that Asylum Street, Asylum Avenue corridor, with the rail station really in the center of that, and a lot of great amenities. And over time, and because of really kind of behavioral patterns, mostly, we became very much an auto-centric population here in Hartford and around the country. And we started building highways, and obviously the highway that came through in and of itself is a physical barrier, something that cuts through the middle of the city. But you can also see kind of how that fabric of the community has really dissipated to a lot of parking and a lot of auto-centric uses. And so as we think about the highway and how we repurpose it, we want to think about how we also change the nature of those uses in proximate to the highway, and how we kind of rebuild that infrastructure that was there in the 30s, that dense urban fabric. And so in looking at that, we have this area where the highway sits and the rail sits, and they're pretty separated. So they create a very large gap in the downtown fabric. But now we're going to be looking at a situation where those are kind of shifted and pulled together. And does that give us a chance to begin to fill in that gap and really kind of build in a new downtown or a new section of the city that's really connected to these very important pieces of infrastructure and this very important new transit node? And it's as much about taking that existing downtown edge, which is very separate from the hillside edge, and bringing that out, right, extending the downtown, but really also extending the hill and bringing the Asylum Hill edge down. And that area in the middle, that interstitial area in the middle, is really this area we're talking about as this great new growth opportunity in downtown Hartford. And so how can we capitalize on this great investment to really create this great downtown that's the center of the city and allows the city to grow on both sides, in the downtown and on the hill? And so we started by thinking about some kind of overarching goals for how to shape this strategy. And it was mentioned today by the lady at the table. We want to improve connectivity. between Asylum and Walnut and to the south, there is not much of a grid. There never has been much of a grid. But can we establish a grid there so that we can really create the connectivity? And it's not just automobile connectivity. It's connectivity for pedestrians and bikes. So let's think about connectivity as a really important part of this. And then the second is not just making the connectivity, but using that connectivity to create a strong sense of place. And that's not just economic, but it's also open space strategies and activity centers. Creating a lot of activities that can happen in that area to really center this as a district around a big transit facility. And that positions this part of Hartford for economic growth, for economic opportunity, in a means that is possible for the city and within the guidelines of what the city is thinking in terms of growth in the area. So we kind of want to take these principles and think about them as we're thinking about all the very challenging aspects of designing these facilities through the middle of an already existing city. And so this is the kind of the street system, and what I was getting at is, you know, as you always had, you have the Asylum corridor, and then you've got these large stretches between Capitol and Walnut, so there's not much movement east-west through this area. And really, there's not direct movement north-south through this area either. And is there a way to begin to look at this network and create more east-west and north-south connectivity in this area so that you can begin to build an urban grid? And so, kind of the first thing you think about is, where can we maybe make some of these moves? How can these moves be connected in with these major highway investments to create, again, this kind of place in the center? And this is just a figure ground, but this kind of really shows you in more detail kind of how little roadway infrastructure you have in this area. And that makes it hard then to really be able to build around that. The other thing to think about is not just the road system, but the spaces that are created as you think about the network that you're creating. And so this is just an example of Rockefeller Center, a very successful urban grid and a very successful, very large-scale development. I'm not saying that Hartford should have a Rockefeller Center, but it's interesting to lay up Rockefeller Center over one of those two kind of large spaces to get a sense of the scale of the space in there and the opportunities that could come about from how you might design these locations both north and south of Asylum.
Tom?
Yes?
Would you go back to that? You could also just as easily take your Rockefeller Center and put it north of Asylum, could you not?
Oh, yeah, this was just, absolutely. I think that the reason for illustrating this is, as you think about the roadway system, you also want to think about the private realm. And you want to think about the spaces and buildings that are going to be built in that area. So it's the streets, it's the places for pedestrians and bikes, it's the types of development and private use spaces that could happen, and then it's also the open space. And the open space is kind of the third critical part to this. How do we make great visual connections through this area? How do we begin to expand sort of the park-like connectivity of much of Hartford through this place? How do we also make the streets very much, as Casey was saying and Tim was saying, make the streets of a nature that you can have bikes on them and have pedestrians move on them, so that you have a lot of open spaces through this area, so it feels like a great downtown. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, because this network process begins to set up a thinking about, well, then also, where do you place your station within this? How does the station become this kind of key node within this district that you're creating? And David wanted to really kind of talk through some of these great places that we can look at from other parts of the country to give us emphasis.
Just one quick thing before David. I know some of you did come here to talk about the network, and again, I just want to let you know that there's a room set up next door to us. If anybody from Ashley Street wants to go and talk about things, we'll be over there. So
name is Jay Stan McCauley, and I do business as Light Source Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you plan you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be, but let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.